Took a year off. That one's, yeah.
Yeah, but
Close and, in Boston, so a lot of people do know it. But I was taking a year off. So I was living in Minnesota.
I haven't updated the our representatives. I don't know.
He also sang a lot. And he had sung a lot. We always sang together.
That's for our
You gotta join the events person. So that was the last time I
that's my
sang.
whole district.
You didn't do it.
Yeah.
Is the biggest
More modern. Anyway,
the
couple
collection of
fun performances. That was like the last time I ever did.
process.
It.
You're from up there, aren't you?
Yeah. No. I'm in Minnesota.
Oh, really?
Yes, hometown, down there.
The newsletter.
Yeah.
I don't know how to add people actually, but I think let me forward it to you. I think at the bottom, like there's an opportunity to kind of like, let me forward it and see if that.
you can also just add.
Are you would convert?
What was your?
Cultural heritage, family celebrations,
Oh, okay.
the holidays and holiday stuff.
Well, then you know that. Yes, exactly.
I sort of said, okay, so we're gonna come in and be members here, but should I convert?
But yeah, I didn't know that was you.
No, now we go to.
You go to I've always heard.
The one that had
you. Yes. Hey, Barbara.
Barbara. Oh, how are you?
Yes.
How you doing?
That building's been solid.
We're gonna get going.
The old building, the old synagogue, the old.
Welcome, everybody. I think we are going to call this meeting to order. This is like exciting. We have almost a room full of people, which is the most that we have had in person for a long time. So I just want to start by welcoming everybody. There is still plenty more pizza in the back of the room. Anybody can help themselves during the meeting, and anybody who's online that feels like coming down to join us here in person, please do, and start by getting pizza. Are there any announcements that people would like to make? Are there any public comments that people would like to offer? This is like a deafening silence.
And nobody online either?
No hands raised.
I am assuming that if somebody online were doing that, we would see a hand raised or something.
Yes.
Okay, so our first order of business is the nomination and election of new steering committee members. We have 4 folks who raised their hands and offered to help us out. Our steering committee had gotten very slim. It was down to just Nelson Martell and me. And we put out a call for help and got some great response. And so do we just nominate people and then have an election, I think? And
I would say if you just announce who a possible slate is, you could take a motion from the room.
I think we'll do that. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
I second that.
So our slate of new steering committee members is Uta Reagan in the back of the room over there, Nancy Harkins in the middle of the room, Mills Forney over here taking minutes for us because he's already doing the work. And I should say everybody has already been doing the work. He's just doing work right now as we speak. And Anita, is it Rapone or Raponi? Anita Rapone.
I would move the slate of 4 new members for the steering committee.
Do we have a second?
Second.
There we go. Any discussion? So voting is open to all residents of Ward 6. So I know some of our guests are not necessarily residents of Ward 6, but anybody who is a member of Ward 6 who is in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? I would say it was unanimous, and I will say I am really grateful for the help and excited to be working with all of you.
Likewise. Thank you for having us.
There we go.
Let me just put in, if you want to be heard on the tape or by the people online, you need to get near a microphone and we'll speak. So don't be afraid to grab it. You're almost close enough.
Okay.
The gentleman in the middle is definitely close. The gentleman closest to me is not going to get. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that reminder. Tonight's meeting is entirely devoted to learning about the candidates in our upcoming election, our local candidates. And it was a little bit confusing because these are votes that are based on state districts, not on city wards. So this is the Ward 6 NPA, which is divided amongst 3 House districts. And when I was looking at the map, I read it wrong. And so invited folks from a 4th House district. There we are. And we are divided among 2 Senate districts. And we have a variety of folks here from different districts who are not necessarily running against each other. And that's fine. This is not intended to be a debate. It's intended to be an opportunity for the folks who are running for office to introduce themselves and connect with some of their constituents. So I'm thinking that we'll just go in the order that is listed here on the agenda. And Tiff, I believe that would put you up first.
It would.
And I think Charlie can advise you if you're in a good spot and if you're close enough.
It's okay.
Yes.
I suppose that I do not need to speak to my colleagues here. Well, I'm really thankful for the invitation. My name's Tiff Bloomley. I live in the Five Sisters neighborhood. I have for, I guess, the last 20 years, and moved to Vermont because I felt like Vermont could be a welcoming place for my family. And it has proven to be just that. And I've been a nonprofit leader. I'm a mom. I'm sorry. Want me to just, okay. Okay. Thank you. Nonprofit leader. I have taught school, and 2.5 years ago, I decided to run for the legislature, really to my surprise, because I had thought I was a very happy advocate, but we were facing the first months of the pandemic, and all of a sudden we all became aware of certain things, issues that I've been working on for a very long time. And it seemed as if this was an opportunity to really address some of those issues in a more systemic way. And so over the biennium, we did a lot, and some of them related to pension. I mean, some of them related to the pandemic and some of them not. We came up with, I think, a pension resolution that was embraced far and wide and we passed over the governor's veto unanimously We made changes in the pupil weighting for English language learners, which affects Burlington significantly, and passed a number of tax credits that benefit different groups in different ways. But a lot of our work was really focused on the pandemic and addressing the issues in the pandemic. And that's food insecurity, housing, healthcare access. We learned we learned a lot more about what wasn't in place for people for whom English was not a first language. Keeping childcare centers open, and I'm trying to look at my writing and understand what improved BB access. What would that be? I'll just come back to that. But anyway, so what? Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. That's why he's a senator and I'm a House member. These aren't new needs, but they were really kind of brought to the fore, magnified by the pandemic. So what did we learn through the work that we did? First, that the mental health system isn't a system. And we are not meeting the needs that have made themselves very, very clear. The role of childcare centers, not just as places where our children learn some of their very first lessons, but as an economic lever, as critical to the economy. We learned the importance of paid family leave, especially if we didn't have it. The impossible shortage of housing, and a trend line in available housing that has been going down, 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 and then became got to a crisis point when people started moving in, property values started going up, and people were priced out of the market. And we learned that we don't need to incarcerate as many people as we do, because for the pandemic's sake, we emptied our prisons of nonviolent offenders. And so I'm very hopeful. I don't get to set the agenda, but I can certainly use my voice to influence it. I hope that we will work to prioritize those issues and in both the House and the Senate. But this job isn't just about policymaking. And I'm kind of wonkish about some things, but really a lot of the work is about responding to people who call. 1 minute, you said? Okay, great. People who call, who had problems getting their unemployment checks, who had problems with qualifying for rental assistance, et cetera. And those are really important. I didn't realize that state officials would return my phone calls or emails way more quickly than when I wasn't writing from a legislative address. And it's really satisfying to be able to help people with some of those issues. And the job also involves coordinating with local officials, the city council, because we don't operate in our own little vacuum. There are many things in Burlington that then happen in Burlington, or Burlington has needs that need to be addressed by state government. So we've spent a lot of time, Gabrielle and I, in building those relationships, and then finally trying to anticipate what the needs are by talking with service providers and local businesses, et cetera, so that can inform the priorities that we set. And at any rate, I hope that I have earned your trust and your support. It's been an honor to serve. And I hope I've done well by you all. Thank you.
And we are now going to switch to Gabrielle Stebbins, who is online. She is in the midst of
I'm here.
we're doing it safely. So please go ahead, Gabrielle.
Excellent. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm actually heading down to a nonpartisan conference in Rhode Island, which is the National caucus of environmental legislators. And I just say that because I would be there in person otherwise, so I apologize, I'm not. Tiff covered so many of the things that we've worked together on, as well as with all of the other reps and senators in the room and on the line. And I'm not going to repeat what she said. I do want to just say one thing, which is about how we work together. You know, we've received some comments occasionally like, this is weird. You guys really work a lot together. Are you the same? And I just want to say we're not the same, which as you guys start to know each other, you'll know that. But we find it really, really helpful given how much comes across our desks, how many different types of votes we need to make, and having Barbara Rachelson in a third in a different committee from the two of us really helps us understand way more than we might be able to do if we were working just more as an individual. So Tiff mentioned many, many things. As many of you know, I work my day job in clean energy consulting. So just to highlight some of the areas that we made progress in terms of environmental and energy considerations, the $8.3 billion budget that we passed this past year with no increase in taxes was, to Tiff's point, incredibly transformative, but it also, really harnessed quite a bit of the federal dollars that were brought to us to do really boring but critical things like shoring up our roads, maintaining free public transit or zero fare public transit for another year, extending, hopefully in the next few weeks, finishing up the roundabout right at Route 7, Shelburne Road. We put millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars into water quality improvements, into revitalization of downtown community centers in ways that are, as environmentally sustainable and also economically sound as possible. One of the bills that I was very excited to work with quite a bit, even though I'm not in that committee, was the Workforce Economic Development Bill, because frankly, if we don't figure out how to really harness the strengths of Vermont in terms of our natural resources, our people, and really prioritize where we can connect the dots in terms of employees and holes in employers' offerings, then we're missing an opportunity for taking all of these federal dollars that are coming our way right now and reinvesting so that we have a long-term robust growth plan ahead of us in Vermont, which is easier said than done, given what we learned yesterday about OPEC cutting how many millions of barrels of oil, which is going to hurt everybody, which is why moving forward in the next 2 years, I will be hopefully working quite a bit on continuing to identify ways that we can help Vermonters save money on how they heat their homes, how they drive their cars, so that ideally it's easier to pay for all the things that we say we want. I also want to just say, as Tiff and I have been holding lemonade stands, what we've heard from folks in terms of really top priorities, we've heard lots of priorities, but top priorities are definitely public safety and affordability, and the concern around Burlington High School. And I do know, having spoken with quite a few of our Burlington delegate folks and colleagues in Montpelier, that there is a deep understanding that we need help to get that 165 million way down. There is a deep understanding that we need to identify a longer term plan to address those who are very mentally ill and should not be living on our streets, but prison isn't necessarily where they should be either. And also in terms of housing, how do we actually make it so that we're seeing a lot more housing, from UVM for our students? How are we going to be a lot more creative to make sure that Burlington is still, Burlington is more affordable as opposed to what people are feeling right now? And I'll leave it at that. I apologize. Yeah, sorry.
That's time right there.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I'm going to go onto my headphones and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm going to get back on the road. And thank you so much for the invitation. Stebbins for Vermont. You can just Google it if you want to read a little bit more about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I don't see Tom McCarty here, but before we move on from Chittenden 13, I just want to make sure that's right. No. So Chittenden 14, Barbara Rachelson.
Hi, my name's Barbara Rachelson. I'm running for my 6th term, and I have represented Burlington's Chittenden 6 district, which has been a 1-seat district, and it has morphed with the reapportionment and the increase in population in Burlington. Chittenden 6, well, all the old numbers went away, but Chittenden 14 became a 2-seat district with 1 extra representative for Burlington. So that's really exciting news. And while those of you, most of you who are listening or in this room were part of 6, not all of you were, because we've discovered very close to election day for the primary that certain people that were expecting Tip and Gabrielle on the ballot saw my name on the ballot. And so the maps were not readily available in the beginning. And I'm excited about representing a district twice the size. And so Tiff and I share a lot of common background in terms of coming from the nonprofit sector. And in fact, when Tiff joined the legislature 2 years ago, I was thrilled because I kept saying we need more nonprofit folks in the legislature, because I think the mindset that we bring, in addition to being tireless advocates, is really looking at how money is spent and what is the return on investment, and are we doing right by the people with the money that we are spending? There's like a very, very strong fiduciary responsibility. And I've served, my first term, I served on House Education and have become an advocate of looking at putting the $1.8 billion we spend on a shrinking number of students into education, teaching, and programming, and less into supervisory unions, different districts, things that really bring no bearing on outcomes for kids. So I have famously introduced a 1 school district bill for many years. I don't get people laughing at me anymore. Hawaii has 1 school district. And I think what we mean by local control can still happen without having 280 school districts that are very costly from an administrative standpoint. I've also served on House Judiciary, and a lot of the legislation that I've worked on has been related to looking at how does our judicial system work? We don't handle the corrections end of it. I also serve on the Judicial Nominating Committee, which has been fascinating. So I bring my perspective. I've been a CEO at 3 different statewide nonprofits for over 35 years. I know what it's like to run a business. I know what it's like to have expenses go up and not have revenues go up. I know what it's like to not have enough employees. And again, we need to be looking at how we can help Vermonters continue to afford to live here. That's one thing I keep hearing as I go door to door, is how expensive it is, and looking at different ways to pay for school funding besides property taxes. The types of bills that I introduce tend to fall into the categories of things like consumer protection. And some of that could be anything from making sure you know, okay, oh boy, it goes fast. Looking at privacy issues and making sure that the government and the private sector are not using your information inappropriately, and looking at, in general, evidence-based practices, so that we're not passing laws that feel good but aren't necessarily making issues better. And I hope to be reelected for another 2 years, and thank you for your time and your support.
Then we have one more house candidate here, and that's, Brian Chino. Who is not actually running from Ward 6. We figured out somewhat belatedly. I read the maps wrong, but Brian, just want to give you a chance to say hello, since you were so kind as to show up. And then I want to open the floor up to questions from anyone for any of the candidates. You could say more of a hello than that if you like.
I didn't say hello, I said hi, but. Is it shall or may, you know? A legislative joke. So hello, I'm Brian Chino. I'm Brian Chino. I live in the Old North End. And it's Chittenden. What are we now? 15. It's so confusing to me, but people thought maybe there was a piece of Ward 6, and then I looked and there wasn't. But I'm happy to meet with people anywhere, like in the state, if they want to talk. So it's nice to come to the South End. I'm not sure like what we're supposed to say or if there was prompts. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that I heard people talking about priorities. In the next session, I'd like for us to follow up on what we've done with housing and expand the work on housing. And I have a lot of ideas about that I'm happy to talk with people about. I think we need to look at with the rise of violence that's occurring. We need to really look at what is driving that violence. And the governor put out a 10-point plan to address the violence. And I think that's a start. But if we're going to increase policing and we're going to increase prosecution, then we need to make sure where people go makes the problem better and not worse. And I think this is the moment for us to look at the Norway model and to look at corrections reform, so that when violent criminals go to a facility, that the facility doesn't make them more violent, that it actually rehabilitates them and integrates them back into the community. And I encourage everyone to look at the Norway model. And maybe I'll end with this, like, speaking of the Norway model, this isn't really necessarily related to legislation, but it's connected to this concept that when like last year around this time, the city evicted the Sears Lane encampment and without anywhere for people to go. And people have been languishing in hotels. People have been sleeping in tents in the woods as arrows are shot into the tents at night. Like, people have been really traumatized, but the city's moving towards creating the pod village. And as part of creating the pod village, is good Isham Street Gardening and Other Optimistic Doings. It's a community group that I started on my street many years ago, and we've expanded out and we're helping people around the city. We're working with people who are going to be living in the encampment and the neighbors, and we're going to try to bring the neighbors, the existing neighbors, together with the new neighbors of the encampment or the village to garden. And then the idea is that if we start that now before people move in, then when they move in, they know each other. And then we want to expand those gardens from that point to link with the Is Good Gardens as a sort of experiment. And it sounds like a lot of the ideas that came out of the feedback of the Sears Lane residents are happening. Like, the city's going to consider building housing on that site in 3 years that they get priority to move into. And so I share this because the administration is looking at what we're doing with this encampment as a test to see what might be done around the state. And I think the link here is that perhaps we could work to look at the strengths and challenges of that model and see if there's a way to create temporary housing around the state on a mass scale in places that will eventually get redeveloped, so that we put people somewhere now, but then eventually they get to live in the real housing that goes there. So I'll stop there. I want to give you an example of how it all fits together. So thank you.
Or if you have a public question. That's fine too. I would encourage the folks who are online as well to raise your hand or unmute, and we'll be happy to recognize you. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Megan Ipler-Wood. I live in Ward 6. I haven't had enough time to study why the high school budget is so enormous. And I know that our counselors here, our representatives may have had to study this already, but tell me if you haven't. because I know that the state is going to be involved in ultimately helping to finance it. Just today in 7 days, I read that the bid is based on out-of-state contractors, which I just learned like 20 minutes ago. And I'm just wondering what, I just perhaps missed it over the summer, but I haven't seen the due diligence on the pricing. Of course, we want a high school. I don't think that's the issue. And it's bothering me that everyone's making that the issue. The issue is affordability, first of all, for those of us that live here. And second of all, how necessary is that enormous cost? And how will the state view that? So and anyone that's had a chance to look, I'd be so appreciative.
I'm happy to if so haven't really introduced myself yet. So I'm Phil Baruth. Will we be doing
You'll have your 5 minutes.
Okay.
Starting at 7:10, but
Great.
go ahead and jump in.
in advance of that?
Yeah, you're perfect for this.
Um,
Thank you.
Just a few things first. So in terms of due diligence, I just want to speak up on behalf of the school board. They have, and Tom Flanagan, the superintendent, they have scrubbed that bid and reduced it a number of times through absolute diligence and going again and again through what's necessary, what's possible. It's still predicated on the state coming through with some money. I'm looking into we put together an emergency fund of $32 million at the end of last session for not just Burlington, but everywhere in the state is undergoing mandatory PCB testing. And we've already had Cabot has found that they have an auditorium that's, much higher than the allowable readings. So they are out of that space and are going to need to tap that fund. There's a $2.5 million addition to that that's supposed to be treating emergencies between now and January. All a way of saying that the state, the district, the superintendent, everybody is trying to keep the price down as much as possible. What I will say is that I was on the school board 20 years ago, and even then we were being told that the high school threatened our accreditation because it was not up to 21st century standards. So in Vermont, we have gotten lax. We've gotten comfortable with the idea that the state will not help build new schools. And that's because in the 60s and 70s, we had a bunch of new schools. But now we're hitting the point where not just Burlington, but many, many districts have old, sometimes crumbling buildings without HVAC systems. We really need to, as tough as it sounds, we need to tighten our belts and we need to build a new school. So I hear you, and the out-of-state contractor piece I can't speak to because I wasn't a part of that particular decision-making process. But I will vouch for the fact that having seen the original bids, which were over 200 million, they have successfully brought it down by tens of millions. And that I have a daughter right now at the Macy's. She's not happy about it. And I'm not happy about it. So if we can get a school built out of this, it will be one silver lining out of a very horrible 10 years.
I just wanted to add quickly to that. Yesterday in Front Porch Forum, Gabrielle and I put a little announcement about an online forum that will feature some students who are right now at the high school, give you that perspective, plus have some school board members present to answer questions about the budget, because they really are the ones that have, seen it through the whole process. So that's next Thursday, and we're going to put it out again probably tomorrow, and another announcement on Monday. Well, anyway, we're going to be staggering so we get a full audience. We've already got 20 people signed up at present because people had a lot of the same questions that you did.
Can I speak to that question?
Sure. And I'll say we do have a bunch of hands online. Martine, so I'll ask in Infinite Co-Pleasure put his hand up first, and then Cara Simone, and then you can go after that. So I'll just note that the expectation was that we would do the House candidates and questions for them, and then the Senate candidates, and then questions for them. But I think a question comes up and people have something to say, so we'll figure it out as we go along. So, Infinite, would you like to address this?
Yes, please. Thank you so much for noticing that my hand was up. I really appreciate that. I just wanted to affirm the questioner, the questioner's curiosity around due diligence, and not that the school hasn't done that and that they've been scrubbing, contractors as best as they can. But what I also have questions about is the extent to which the community has been engaged on this process. And so I think that's why so many questions are coming up about the costs, because some of us feel like, okay, when did, what meeting did I miss where, where this was being discussed? So I just wanted to affirm that questioner's curiosity around the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Cara, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Kara.
Kara, and did you have a question or?
I did. I just wanted to comment on the high school issue and maybe refocus what the issues are for voters anyway, or at least this household and a few others. So I just want to say that, as a Burlington resident, I love Burlington, and we obviously need a high school. My kids graduated 2 years ago and 3 years ago from Burlington High School in the midst of the pandemic and the PCB crisis. And, I've lived in my house now for 20 years here, right next door to where this meeting is being held. But, it's frustrating because I think there was so much lack of a good management at the high school. There was so much maintenance that was deferred. And, I'm not thrilled that my daughter was exposed to PCBs for 4 years of her high school career, or, that my son ended up at a Macy's. It was a terrible experience for him. I know other kids have had good experiences, but I think that the frustration is that we have so many bonds. We have a hit in the middle of the city, and they just passed, they're starting another project to redo Main Street. And I think the high school is probably our priority, but it's tough as a taxpayer, right? We keep hearing that, our taxes are going to double, and my taxes are crazy. And there's a housing crisis. My college age kids can't find housing that's affordable. And the value of my house keeps going up, but that's not a good thing for us because we're paying more and more taxes. And, I'm looking at retirement, and there's no way my kids are taking out loans. I'm paying crazy property taxes, and we're not saving for retirement. So it just feels like there's that folks aren't looking at the big picture. Of course, we want a high school, and I'm not accusing anybody of doing due diligence, but there's it seems like we're kind of all over the map. And I would just second what Infinite said, that there's not good communication to what the big plan is to make this affordable for those of us who live here and pay taxes. Yeah, and my husband's chiming in that how do we keep Burlington affordable? Because it's we just went through the renting of an apartment for my daughter, and it's crazy. It's crazy what they're charging, and the lack of apartments that are available is really hard too.
Thank you, Cara. I think we're going to take that both as a comment on the high school and perhaps as a next question about housing and affordability. But before we turn to that, Martine, I wanted to give you a chance to comment on the question about the high school specifically.
Thank you, Dale. I actually didn't hear the question, but I'm gathering after listening to Senator Baruch's response that it had to do with the fact that the contract was not awarded to a local contractor. Was that correct?
Yes.
Part of the question included the fact that the estimate was based on an out-of-state bid. But I think the important question is really just about the affordability of it.
Okay, then Yeah, I'm not going to chime in on that. I wanted to speak specifically to the contract, and I'm mainly here just to introduce myself as a Senate candidate tonight.
Okay, well, we'll finish up. I think Cara did raise a great question that I would like to offer, specifically the House representative candidates, a chance to opine on, which is just this general question of affordability in Burlington and in the state as a whole. Because it's something that I know that I've heard concerns about from plenty of people, and it's not limited to any one particular House committee. Anyone who'd like to comment on that, it'd be great to hear what you have to say. Brian.
There's it's a really complicated, affordability is really complicated because, like, what are we talking about? Like inflation? Are we talking about the price of one specific thing or another? I'd like to talk about housing affordability for a second, because it's one of the significant challenges right now for people. And I want to talk about potential solutions, not the problem. One solution I would like to see happen is for us to give renters the right of first refusal to buy a property before it goes on market at fair market value. Meaning that they would get an appraisal, the seller would get an appraisal, they'd compare them, determine some kind of fair market value, and they would get the right of first refusal to either buy it individually or create a cooperative or work with an agency to buy it, because that could then stabilize rents if you have more owner occupied housing. And we're also could help people, like lift people out of poverty and end generational poverty if people start owning their own homes. That my generation can't do something that 2 generations ago could anymore because of the way the housing is treated as an investment versus like a right. Another thing I'd like to see is, and not everyone's going to agree on this, and it's okay, that we come up with some formula to determine what's fair market value for rent. And if a landlord wants to pay more, the higher they go, the more tax they pay. And then there's a point at which the tax they pay is so much that it's not worth charging that much. So we really have strict penalties to cap rent. And then the other way, that if they lower rent, they get a tax break. So we start saying to people, you know what? You can get a tax break if you charge a little bit less. And so there's just 2 ideas of things we could do with housing that might help, letting more people own and making it easier for people to own, and making it so that people, another thing is I think there should be some kind of speculation tax for people who buy properties and flip them for higher prices within a certain amount of time. I just think we have to start doing that in addition to building housing, because until we do that, as long as we keep treating housing as this like commodity, that you're extracting wealth from like the backs of people who are in a desperate place because it's a right. Until we change that, it's only going to get worse. So if you don't agree, I'm happy to hear your opposition at some point, but those are just some starting places of solutions.
Would any of the other candidates like to talk about this? And Gabrielle, if you're driving and can do so safely, you are included in that invitation. Tiff, you go ahead.
Well, I want to echo my concern about housing, because it's one of the bigger expenses that any household bears. And there isn't one solution. There are probably 15 things that we need to do. And they range from zoning changes to doing some additional regulation of people who own multiple Airbnbs that have taken, a lot of housing stock right off the market. And I think investing in workforce housing, there are a number of companies who are coming to Champlain Housing Trust saying, we are willing to put up some money for housing, a certain number of units. Can you help us? And they don't really want to own the housing. They just want to have a place for workers to go, because they can't hire them because they can't find a place to stay. And I think that we need to think more about how to make starter homes, how to incentivize building them. We did a little bit of that this year. And I think that we need to explore how other places are approaching that, because that's the biggest hole in our housing market. So that's all I have to add.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just add that I believe I heard a statistic last week whereby like 17% Tiff or Barbara, help me out here. 17% of either the sales in the last year or general overall ownership is by investor-owned companies and not people. And so one of the ideas that has been raised just as an idea is, do we end up taxing, if it's purely an investment property, do we end up proposing a taxation structure that's higher for that business? I do think it's important, and I don't mean this as passing the buck, but it is important to remember that we've been shunting this problem for about 30, 40 years. And so even though we put a lot of money into housing over the last 2 years with the federal dollars, it's going to take time to see the impacts of that. And unfortunately, also, we're seeing that quite a bit of what we appropriated is taking even longer to actually get out the door. So that is something that we're going to have to focus on when we get, hopefully, back to Montpelier in January.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Barbara? Oh,
I have something to say here.
could we just let the candidate finish first? And
Okay, sure.
that'd be great. Thank you.
So I just want to list a couple of things. One, again, is looking at how we are funding our school education through property taxes. I know that that's been a complicated issue. We need to continue to look at a different way, because people's property tax bills are just continuing to escalate, and it's not sustainable. I was recently speaking to the director at Cathedral Square Corporation, and she was mentioning the long waiting list that they have of people waiting to get into either assisted living or senior living that are in those starter homes in many cases and want to give up their homes, or they're living in the hospital. We know that there are also some people in prison waiting for housing still. So there are places where people are living that's either very expensive or could be available to other people. And I'm wondering, as we know that the commercial market is not having the same difficulties as the residential market, is looking at creative ways to fund redeploying commercial spaces into residential spaces. Not so much an issue. Tiff mentioned zoning. Act 250 is an issue that's holding people back in other parts of the state. And again, we also should continue to look at accessory small dwellings and adding those into the housing stock.
Thank you. Yuta, did you have a question?
No, I have a comment. No. Actually, I do have a question, because I think it was 6 or 7 months ago that I read that the state was involved to look for regulations in the short-term rental market. And after I read it, it went dead. So what happened?
Are you talking about a bill?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It never got off the wall in our committee. It was never discussed. I think because we had other big housing bills to deal with, and we could have incorporated some language around short-term rentals, but that is a pretty politically charged issue. And I think that I think this session it may come up, but it's controversial because that's how some people are making their living.
Well, what did they do before?
I understand. And I'm not saying that I don't support it. It's just I'm trying to explain why it never got discussed in our committee. But partly we had to get the federal money out and prioritize how that was going to be spent. And before we took up some of those other issues. And I think that there's a wide open field, and I'd love to talk to you more about that if that's an issue you care about.
I really think if you consider how many ordinances are on the books to protect the communities from these kind of rentals, and they are not enforced. I'm just in a big question mark here. Why is that?
I,
There are
I mean-
ordinances on the books and they are not being enforced.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up something I don't know enough about to really have a conversation about.
It's not directed just.
No, I know.
And-
And if anybody else has, I just think, but what I want to say is, I think that is going to be one of the topics of conversation in the House General Committee in the coming session. Because it's one of the places we haven't even touched. We haven't dared touch it.
Okay, I think we should move on and give the Senate candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves. A few of you have already participated in the meeting, but that's all to the better. But I want to give each of you 5 minutes or so to tell us who you are and why you're running. And so Phil Ruth, we'll start with you.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm Phil Baruth. I'm running for my 7th term in the Senate. Ironically, when I started my first biennium, we had Tropical Storm Irene, and I found out the hard way what that means when you're in the legislature. All of your pre-planned bills and activities and agendas go out the window, and you're then dealing 24/7 with the emergency. And so I was new in the Senate, and I found myself out in Richmond in cellars, mucking out cellars, helping people find and restack wood that had been swept away by the flood, helping people stabilize their homes because the water had moved them on their foundations. So I was doing a lot of physical work out there because I wasn't yet long enough in the legislature to have my hands on the levers that could move money, that could ease regulations, that sort of thing. Fast forward to the pandemic. I did find myself at that point in a much different place. I was chairing the Ed Committee when the pandemic hit. Federal money started to flow in. And so in addition to providing oversight of the administration, which all of us did, House and Senate, you're always keeping a weather eye on what the administration is doing, making sure that they're keeping their promises, making sure that they're operating efficiently. But in addition, we were trying to figure out how could we spend the federal money as efficiently as possible. So we had a bunch of school managers and engineers come in, and we put the question to them, we have millions of dollars flowing in. What's the absolute best way we could protect our kids from the pandemic? And they all said the same thing, HVAC, air handling systems, because at that point, we had just figured out, if you remember the beginning of the pandemic, we were all wiping everything down. Then all of a sudden it shifted to the respiratory phase when we knew that that was how it was being transmitted primarily. So we put ultimately about $20 million into a program run by Efficiency Vermont. They queued up all the needs in the state for all the districts, independent schools, homeschooling operations, in some cases, childcare operations that were in homes, and public schools. And we put them in a queue according to need. And at this point, we've upgraded almost every system in the state. So we found out in the course of that there were at least 10 districts in the state that had completely non-functional HVAC systems. They were turning the switch and nothing was actually happening. So think now about PCBs, think about radon. All of that was just unknown until we went through this effort. That was one piece, and we're still tracking that to this day. Just to go back to where I began with Tropical Storm Irene, if you look in the budget for last year, you will still find Tropical Storm Irene items that are still being spent and updated and caretaken. So this pandemic is not over for us. We will be doing this 10 years from now. And we do it on behalf of the community. We do it for very little money. People somehow have this idea that we're getting paid a lot of money. It's not true. We're hardly paid at all, but I just want to give a shout out to our reps They are fantastic. Burlington has the best set of representatives that I can think of. And the Senate has 10 new people coming in, great energy, as well as people like Tom and Ginny, who I've worked with for years. So I think the state is in good hands coming out of this pandemic. I just want to go back and finish the job.
Thank you. Infinite Co-Pleasure, you're on.
Thank you, Dale. Hi, folks. My name is Infinite Pleasure, and I moved to Vermont in like 1991 as an 18-year-old. So I've been here a little bit, and this has become my home for better or for worse. While it was not that easy for me to thrive here as a Black male, living in the old North End, and trying to figure out how to survive in the underground economy. But the University of Vermont and folks there, like Will Miller and Laura Fishman and Joan Smith took me in, and I was able to finish my degree there and work with Beverly Colston and work at Spectrum Youth and Family Services for a few years before I went off back to New York City for a graduate degree in urban policy. Did some field work in New Orleans with the Community Development Finance Institution down there, and then came back to Burlington in 2012 and started a job with Voices for Vermont's Children, an independent multi-issue child policy research and advocacy nonprofit, right? And so we are lobbyists at the State House for children, youth, and families. And, we've worked on issues like oral hygiene. We advocate for reach-up benefits every year. And just recently was able to get a public advocate office in the state for children and families. And so, I think of myself as a policy advocate by trade and a community organizer by vocation. Because the first 5 years I did grassroots community organizing in the Burlington and Winooski schools and worked hand in hand with families who were marginalized and sort of disenfranchised from the political process. And our work brought restorative practices to the district. It brought an advisory program to the high school. The work we did brought transportation to Winooski schools for kids who live in the Elm Street neighborhood and need to walk to school in the coldest winter months. And so I was really fortunate to get to know the people on the ground in these communities who are really struggling to get by. And this is not just the New American communities, this is communities who have been here for generations. And so that has been sort of my orientation to I would say the policy and the politics that sort of come downstream from the State House. I've also studied and collaborated with community organizers across Rwanda. Where organizing projects demonstrated real world examples of collective power. And I've also had the opportunity to see that here. Specifically with policies in Montpelier, some of the things I have advocated for in the recent future, Act 67, which is a bill relating to equitable access to high quality education through community schools. S114 was a literacy bill that we're still looking forward to seeing how it rolls out. I've also worked with Act 1, the Ethnic Studies and Social Equity in Schools working group for the past couple of years. And I've also really, just watch the process as a lobbyist advocating for folks who don't have the opportunity to show up and testify for themselves. So this is kind of the perspective that I'm hoping to bring to the State House and really engage communities in a different way than we have been in the past.
Thank you, Infinite. Martine Gulick, you're on.
Thank you, Dale. Can you all hear me okay? I've got my earbuds in. Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So yes, hello to everybody, and thank you to all our fabulous leaders. I agree with Senator Baruch that we have some of the best in the state, and I'm really happy to see you here and thankful for your service. I'm running for state senate, as you probably know at this point. I am in 4 Zoom meetings tonight, so I might pop off at some point. I've got another one coming up. I just got off a Zoom with the Vermont School Board Associations where we were talking about good governance and how important it is. That was fascinating. I grew up, this district is a great district for me because I grew up in South Burlington on the other side of the Limekiln Bridge. So Winooski was really close to where I grew up. Essex is where my father worked for many years and where I worked at the high school there and the tech center. And then Burlington is where I've lived for the last 27 years, where my husband and I raised our family and where our kids attended school and where I am currently a 3-term school commissioner. As a teacher, as a high school teacher, I got to see, as you can imagine, many issues that are facing Vermonters, from food and housing insecurity to mental health issues, to systemic racism, to labor shortages. These were all part of my daily existence in a school district. So, you know, seeing this and being on the ground in these situations really has always encouraged me to be part of public service and advocacy. I spent the last year working really hard on getting our education funding formula changed. I wasn't always very popular because not everybody wanted the system to change. But as someone who worked in districts around the state, Woodstock, for example, Essex, South Burlington, I saw the inequities. I would go to work during the day and I would come home and view the school district where my kids were going and the district where I lived. And I saw some of the inequities in how things were funded and the resources that we had and how we were supported. So I knew I had to do something. I got involved with the Coalition for Vermont Student Equity and went to Montpelier and lobbied to change that formula so that it funded adequately students living in poverty, students living in rural parts of the state, and English language learners. And again, I know I wasn't always very popular, but I feel really confident that this work has gone through and that hopefully we will see a change in how we support our students. And, you know, a budget is a value statement. If we're going to call ourselves a progressive state, we all have to work together for what's right for students. So as part of, you know, the main part of my platform is around education, and it is around early education and childcare. I actually met Dale years ago when I helped her with some childcare issues. So investing early in children and families to me is absolutely critical. It pays dividends, obviously, in the form of jobs and a healthy community. And it looks to the future. So it's an optimistic way of looking at the world and looking at the future. Another part of my platform that is really important to me is investing in technical education. You all know that we haven't had a tech center in Burlington now for the last couple of years, but tech center is super important. And the tech center tends to have higher graduation rates, tends to graduate a skilled workforce. And we know that companies have been reporting difficulty in hiring. It's at a 15-year high right now. So we need to get involved, and we need to, again, put money where our values lie. And technical education is a critical part of the learning landscape that we have, and it's an investment that we just can't ignore. As you all know, I've been hearing it echoed tonight. The last few years have been extremely difficult for the Burlington School District. Not only has there been a pandemic, but our high school and our tech center were closed because of PCB contamination.
Martine,
Yeah.
time's running.
I'm sorry. I could go on and on. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I would love to serve all of you. I would love to serve you in the Senate. And if you have any questions, obviously reach out. I'm always available as a school commissioner and as someone who's running and just as a community member. And I'll stop talking now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know Tanya Byhovsky wanted to join us, but wasn't sure if she was going to be able to. I don't see her online. Okay, in that case, we'll go on to the candidates from Chittenden Southeast. Thomas Chittenden, you want to go first?
It's working, Charlie. You can hear me? Great. I don't recognize a lot of people here. I'm Thomas Chittenden, so I'd love to meet all of you afterwards. Introduce myself. I live about 4 miles from here, and for the past about 9 years, I spent just about every Saturday morning at Callahan Park with my 2 girls playing Greater Burlington Girls Soccer League. So I love the South End. I'm running for office for my first re-election for a variety of reasons, but I think it comes back to just my life growing up as a serial volunteer. In college, I was a resident assistant. I worked on the Howard Dean presidential campaign. I was a volunteer firefighter in Williston. Then I was a Green Mountain Transit chair. Then I had some kids in there. They were very time consuming when they were small. And then I had been serving on the South Burlington City Council for the last 8 years. And during that time on the City Council, I saw some opportunities for the state to do things differently, for us to look at regional solutions like regional dispatch, which is still inching along. What we're doing with the Howard Center, funding sources and supporting mental health supports across municipal boundaries through a service that can reach out to where it's needed, when it's needed across all the different towns in the area. I'm running for re-election this year. I was just making notes to remind myself for many of the same reasons as the House members already stated. And I don't disagree with anything the House members say. So rather than go through those points again, I just add a few things that are on my mind as we go into this new session. I've been going to different childcare facilities to really get our hands around childcare, because that is a workforce problem. That is a women's equity problem, since more often than not, that falls disproportionately on the female household member in charge of rearing the children. I'm seeing opportunities to look at the commercial spaces that I heard Tiff speak to have property tax rebates when I was at a facility out in Essex where they are paying the same rent that a store would be paying if they were renting in that space. We need to look at 0 through 5 as the professional services that we see, as the important services that we see in our public schooling. And we need to have property tax, the budget statement, the value statement that is the budget, reward and incent commercial infrastructure to want to find and make way and make it easier, provide the childcare where needed. So I would rather see a way for that facility to get a rebate on their taxes, assuming they have a qualified childcare facility that is actually signing a form saying they're using that facility for childcare. And that rebate doesn't have to go in the pockets of the landlord, not at all. It could go into providing the supports, the infrastructure, the services, or the reduced rent for the childcare facility. So I think there's ways to look at having childcare be a tax exempt status for our property taxes. Another thing at the kindergarten entrance age, there's a small tweak in Vermont law that's somewhat unique or not as common in the rest of the country that I think could help alleviate some of our childcare pressures in the state. On housing, I definitely agree that it's both, there are Act 250 things that I heard Representative Rachelson speak to, but increasingly I'm seeing local zoning issues. I have some notions that I want to pursue in the legislature about interim zoning. I live in South Burlington. Over the last 20 years, we have enacted interim zoning 4 times. I feel that we need to look at when it's being enacted, what it's being enacted for, and what it really is accomplishing or not. And that has to do with some of the pressures we have on our housing stock and where we're going to build houses. So I would also say in that, something that I really love to hear Senator Baruth's perspective on, having served on ways and appropriations. We have had in our funding formula a penalty, an overspending penalty, when certain districts spend a certain amount more per pupil than other ones. Similarly, I'm seeing municipalities. I live in South Burlington. I love South Burlington, but South Burlington has recently passed land use laws, which I would say excessively concern parcels of land that have arable land attached to sewer services that is Virgins clay and not good for agriculture. And that is now now mandated a conservation PUD, I'd like to look at and explore if we have regional targets for housing density, maybe an undergrowth penalty. So not an overspending penalty, but looking at what our regional housing growth goals are, and maybe communities that choose to over-conserve land that is ideally served for housing because it's a proximity to existing services and population centers. Don't tell my friends in South Burlington this is being recorded, so this is going to come back and hurt me. But this could translate to communities that choose to over-conserve as having to pay more taxes, and that's a choice they can make. Okay. I definitely want to pursue more gun control. I have long admired Senator Bruce's leadership on this, and I stand at the ready to help him on multiple fronts there. Happy to talk about that. I also want to see us use tax policy to tax what we don't like and subsidize what we do. I support taxing sugary beverages. I think a gallon of milk should cost less than 2.2 liter bottle of soda. I want to see online sports betting as a tax stream, online sports. I don't want to see casinos and booking parlors, but I want to see a revenue stream to support our education. I want to tax guns and ammo. I own guns. I support individuals' rights to bear arms, but there are things that we can do to match our values, our public safety values, with how we have guns in our society today. And I think assessing them on their purchase and sale makes sense. And I've also got this crazy notion, but I'm out of time. All right. The last thing I'll say is happy to talk about fees. It's hard to run on a platform of raising fees, but Governor Phil Scott has not raised fees during his 3 terms so far. Those fees are creating revenue pressures on our budget. And so if we have those graduate at an incremental amount, especially in these inflationary times, that'll create flexibility elsewhere. Happy to talk about any of this afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Ginny Lyons, you can tell it's your turn. You're reaching for the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us this evening. I'm Senator Ginny Lyons. I have been in the Senate for many years, and I look forward to returning. There are so many issues that you're hearing about tonight, many of which I am very much engaged in. I think all of them, we each find our own niche when we get into the Senate or in the House, but we also are very much involved in all of the issues that you're hearing about. I currently chair the Health and Welfare Committee. And so with that in mind, the pandemic, of course, has really overwhelmed the work that we've done. And I feel that we have been highly effective in that work. And part of it is about enhancing our workforce by providing for different types of licensure. And we've worked closely with the Secretary of State's office in our committee to expand licensure for out-of-state consulting for folks who are retired and want to continue their work as physicians or as nurses. And so that work was highly effective in helping our hospitals and our clinics get through the pandemic. But the healthcare economy is still in trouble. And I think you've all heard and read about the hospital, our hospital, and all the other hospitals across the state really are very much approaching the red. Again, they were in the red, many of them before the pandemic, and now they are going back in that direction. Medical inflation is significantly higher from what we see in our own inflationary world. So the effects of inflation now are exacerbated when you walk into the medical community. And so there are lots of things that people can point fingers out within the healthcare world and say, well, some administrative salaries are too high, or things need to be pulled, the belt needs to be tightened here and there. And we do need to consider that. But overall, we cannot lose our hospitals, and we need to ensure that they continue. So I look forward to some of that work. I am working about looking at the Green Mountain Care Board and how they regulate. I am looking at other areas of the healthcare environment, including workforce. And along those lines, one of the things that we do in our committee each term is to relate very much with appropriations, what's going on in appropriations, because healthcare and human services are a significant amount of our budget. I think it's like 20%. That's huge. And so I spend a lot of my time working with the chair of appropriations and understanding and working with her and other members of appropriations to sort of sort out how our human services and healthcare budget will have, and our policies that we pass in our committees relate to one another. So one of the things that I worked on yesterday, I was at a meeting for hire to hire and child and family advocate. We passed a law last year as a result of some pretty difficult situations in our state, including St. Joseph's in the orphanage issue, including the Kern Hatton School, where there were complaints about abuse of children. And so one of the things that we are looking at is hiring an advocate, a child and family advocate in our state to provide some oversight and some support for the administration and some oversight for folks who might be have some difficulty. So a place where people can go. And it will extend to folks in the world of disability. So this is a big step for the state. It's one person, but it's a lot of work. So I look forward to going back into the State House to work on public health issues related to climate change. I look forward to going back and continuing my work on the extension of the pandemic issues. And most importantly, looking at mental health issues, childcare issues, and the world. We can just continue forever. PCB in schools, PFAS in our drinking water and in our consumer products. So thank you all. And please consider voting for me. This is my district right here now, and it's been trimmed down so much. It used to be all of Chittenden County. Now it's about half the size. It's just really great. But so it's great to be here.
Thank you. I believe that's all of the Senate candidates who are here. And we do have about 5 minutes or a little bit more for questions. So once again, I would open the floor for anyone who's here or online to ask questions of the candidates. If you heard something in particular you want to follow up on, or if you just want to hear what any of the candidates have to say about an issue of concern. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know Senator Chittenden and I know Governor Baruch, I'm sorry, Governor, Senator Baruch care a lot about gun control. And kind of my question is, and I'm not 100% sure that, I mean, let's just say that there are more gun violence episodes going on right now. Where do you see, what do you see as the key variables or the key issues that are leading to the growing gun violence? And I'm just leaving it open. I won't make any suggestions. I'll just leave it to the two of you or anybody. Anybody who wants to start, please can, please do.
Happy to start, although we'll all have something to say. If you're talking about the incidents in Burlington recently, the shootings in Burlington, those seem to be, I would say, I don't know if they're gang related, but they always include the line in the media account that the subjects knew one another and went looking for one another with a gun. So I think then we get into the opioid epidemic. We get into the movement of drugs and guns across state lines, gun trafficking, that sort of thing. So that's a whole area of the Judiciary Committee that I would be working with. The other thing that I would say, though, is in Vermont, because for so long we have been an extremely safe rural state, and gun rights were just never opposed by questions of public safety in any meaningful way. So the idea of proliferation of guns has never been something that we've had to worry about in the way that I think we do now. So if you go back and you look at statistics for the last 30 years, you will see that there's been a massive proliferation of the sale of guns nationwide and in Vermont. Every time a Democratic president is elected now, gun sales skyrocket. Why is that? Is it a coincidence? It is not. You have a very well-funded effort on the right that connects doomsday sort of propaganda with the idea that FEMA is going to come with a list and take your guns. And so you need more guns to protect yourself. And by the way, buy gold and store that, and buy survivalist foods, store those. So there's a money-making machine out there that is connected to radical interpretations of the Second Amendment, I would say. That is driving the idea that every community, every place, every situation benefits from more guns, not less. So what happens when we have a mass shooting? Immediately the right starts saying, we need to flood our campuses with people, good guys with guns. And that's the solution, more guns. So with Thomas Chittenden, with Ginny Lyons, with other senators, we have developed now a very strong majority in the Senate for sensible gun laws. So over the last few years, we've been able to raise the purchase age to 21, ban on high capacity magazines, ban on guns in hospitals, ban on bump stocks, a whole host of things, including something near and dear to my heart, which was universal background checks. Those things all came within the last 6 years. So continuing down that road of finding sensible ways to keep the guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Thomas has some great ideas about linking training and permitting, which he may want to get into. Burlington a few years back had charter changes that would have created gun-free zones, for instance, in bars. I don't understand why that was opposed in Montpelier, but it was killed in the government operations committees. So on those issues, I think there are 5 or 6 things at least we should be doing, but those are some that I think we should continue with.
I think a couple of the folks online may want to chime in on this too. Infinite, I saw you had your hand up, and Martine, I saw you put your camera on. So Infinite, you want to add something to this conversation?
Sure. Was Senator Chittenden in the queue there?
He hadn't told me he wanted to speak by any way that I saw, but
Go ahead. All you.
there's time for everybody.
Okay, thank you. I guess, again, thank you for seeing my hand. What I'd really like to add to the conversation is that, there are human beings on every end of the violence that we're seeing and experiencing. And, the trauma across all these communities is something that we all have in common. We have all experienced trauma at some point in our lives, right? And so we have to rely on the news cycle in order to interpret why this violence is happening, as opposed to having close relationships and an ear to the ground, and relationships with the families of the victims and also the families of the perpetrators, right? Because everyone loses when violence happens like this, right? And I just have to say from my own experience, to conflate gun violence with drug activity is sometimes not always that accurate. And unfortunately, I have relationships with people of the family members of the deceased, not just of the most recent shooting, but of previous shootings. And it's a much deeper than that issue than how we're talking about it. I think one of the things we're missing from all this is that, people don't wake up one day and decide that they want to engage in drug activity, right? Especially folks who don't have a lot of options around employment and economic, vitality in our community, right? And so we do have this underground economy. It does exist. And I do think there are ways that we can, address our violence, and I don't think it's going to come from the top down. I don't think it's going to come from Montpelier and trickle its way down to our communities, right? And so I would just really hope that we go deep with this, and we just to kind of take a step back and really think about the families involved and maybe even, consider being in touch with the families involved, just, as a way of really showing that we are in this together and that we are, still going to be humans, with one another and relate to each other like human beings at the end of the day.
Thank you. Martine, did you have something you wanted to add to the conversation?
I actually did not, and I actually have to go, but I want to say thank you to Infinite for that answer and to Senator Baruth. I do think if I were to stay and if we had another few hours to talk, discussing decriminalizing drugs might be something that we'd want to do, but that is a conversation for another day. I just thank everyone for having me tonight, and I hope those of you who can vote for me will. Thank you.
Thanks, Martine. Did you have something you wanted to add, Tom?
Maybe I'll just say two things to the point that Senator Baruth raised. So I have in my wallet, I got this when I first became a gun owner, when I wanted to buy a handgun. I was going to have in a house with kids. I am a concealed carry permit holder in the state of Florida, and this is reciprocally recognized in 34 states throughout the country. I support a 24 or 48-hour waiting period, and I'd further say that if others go through the training, I have met with a firearms instructor on 3 Saturdays. We went through safety and cleaning guns and storage, proper storage, that I would welcome the type of registration for those law-abiding citizens that want to own and carry firearms to then maybe be able to waive a 24-hour or 48-hour period if they've already qualified themselves as knowing how to handle a firearm. Similarly, with assault rifles, I would like to see, I always compare this to cars. Cars are as dangerous as guns, and we would need them both in times of war. And I would say, if I want to drive a big rig truck, I need to get a special license, a commercial driver's license. If I wanted to buy an assault rifle, something that can do a large amount of damage in a certain period of time, I feel additional training should be required. And that's, I think, safe regulation, fair regulation that will just make it so that guns are more of a challenge to get to, so that they're not lying around or as easily accessible. And I also support safe storage and all the other good things that have come up over the years. So that's just some of the notions I think are worth discussing.
Thank you. Jeannie, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just briefly, the having read, increase in red flag laws, so to keep guns out of the hands of folks who might use them irresponsibly, I think is important. But my comment is related to something that Infinite was talking about, and that is the issue around prevention. And the long-term solution is about people. And it's about looking at how can we change the culture that is a culture of solving problems by using guns. And that does relate very much to the trauma that people experience when they're young. And so we know that the social determinants of health are things that can change people's behavior and over the long term. So having a long-term plan for prevention is something that we have worked on in the House and in the Senate. We have a very strong prevention council in the Department of Health. We also have a chief prevention officer in the governor's office. And now the governor has, through executive order, added a person in charge of preventing violence. I'm interested to know how those two will work together. And then we also have a trauma-informed specialist in the Agency of Human Services. Somehow we've started that discussion at the state level, and it has moved down into schools, and it has moved down into communities. And schools are actually leading in the area of trauma prevention, which I think will ultimately, so it's the long term, it's not tomorrow, it's not passing a bill today, but in the long term will modify the culture and behavior that we're seeing today. It's really sad. I mean, it's just so sad to see how people are solving problems in such violent ways.
I want to say a big thank you to all of the candidates for making time to show up here and share your thinking with us and get to hear from us a little bit. I wish we had more time for this, but we do have one more item on our agenda tonight, which is to learn a little bit about the ballot item on the Chittenden Solid Waste District bond. And so Michelle, would you walk us through that, please?
Yes. Oh. Oops. Yes. So how do you want me to do do you want me to unmute or use? Don't just. Oh, yep. Let me get this. So I'm going to screen share. Thank you all for letting me tag on here. That was a lot of information to absorb, so I appreciate the time that you've given me. I'm going to screen share my presentation. I hope this works. Go. So I will just go through this as quickly as I can and still have it be informative because I want to allow plenty of time for questions and answers. I do have a fact sheet here, and I think I have enough for everyone, as well as a Q&A sheet. So please, if you have to leave, or if you just want more information, please take one of those as you go along. So I am Michelle Morris, I'm Director of Communications for the Chittenden Solid Waste District. And I'm going to just give you a little information about why we have issued this bond, how you can get our ballot, because it could not be included in the general election ballot, and I'll explain why that is. And just any other information that you'd like to have about that. For those who may not know who CSWD is, we're a municipal district created by our member towns, including Burlington. So every town and city in Chittenden County is a member of CSWD. We operate many facilities. Folks may know us from our drop-off centers, the Environmental Depot hazardous waste facility. We have the compost facility in Williston. We have lots of programs and assistance that we offer, and we own one of two large single stream material recovery facilities in the state. So we call them MRFs. That's what they're called all over the world. And so what's a MRF? A MRF is where you send your recyclables, your blue bin recyclables, to be sorted, processed, and then marketed. That's all a MRF does. So CSWD owns the one that serves the northern half of Vermont. So it's not just Chittenden County, it's all of the northern Vermont. It's in Williston. We own the property there, the building, and the contents. It's operated by Casella under contract with us. It is the only publicly owned MRF in the state. The other one in Rutland is owned and operated by Casella. Here's why we need a new MRF. The current one was built in 1993 by us. It is at maximum capacity. That image that you're looking at there, normally that pile in the back corner behind the person you see there is what we see that's called our tip floor, where material comes in and then it's pushed up against the wall to be sorted out and baled. That pile in the back corner is what would be 1 day's worth of material. This is when our baler broke, and this is 3 days worth of material. So it's at capacity. We can't make it any larger. There's no ability to expand the footprint. And it has one baler, which is never a good thing when that's the heartbeat of your facility. When the baler breaks, you're dead in the water. It has no flexibility, meaning, let's say you have, I don't know, a global pandemic where suddenly everybody's ordering things online and the amount of cardboard that is now coming to everybody's homes to recycle goes through the roof. We just had to deal with it. With the machinery, the facility, the capacity we had, we couldn't redirect it or adapt our processes to deal with that. We just dealt with it. So it limits the quantity Vermonters can recycle, and I say Vermonters because we do serve half the state. That facility was designed to have a 25,000 ton a year capacity. It's processing an average of 47,000 a year. That's not uncommon for MRFs, but we are really stretching it. It's inefficient hand sorting. Those gentlemen you see there are the workers who sort all the containers in that facility. It's not 21st century technology by any stretch. And that means we're losing some valuable recyclables. These guys, and it is just all guys, coincidentally, are pulling these materials off as fast as they can and as accurately as they can, and they're tossing the thing they've been trained to sort for into a bunker, sometimes stuff is stuck together, they're moving really quickly, they may miss some things, missort them. Some of it, what is supposed to be trash, gets thrown on the floor and then that's swept out. But sometimes they accidentally pick valuable materials and put them in the trash by accident. Limited storage. So what you're looking at there is what we call high density polyethylene by and large. It's extremely valuable plastic milk jugs. We're selling for more per ton than aluminum during the pandemic. It's only 6% or less of what we get. Plastics are only 6% of what comes to the facility. They do have quite a bit of value. You don't want them stored outside because the conditions, the sunlight, the UV rays, weather degrades the value of that material. But we're at capacity. When the bale storage room is full, we have them go outside, and it limits our marketing flexibility because we can't ride out a lull in the markets, you know, and wait till prices pick up. We have to move stuff out as soon as we have it available. So let's moving on to what this new MRF would get us. The site that we've selected after looking all over the county is property we own on Redmond Road in Williston. It's about 2.5 miles from the current facility. And this is the Redmond Road is where my cursor is moving up here. The blue box shows you the square footage of the current facility, just so you have that for comparison of the new proposed site or proposed building, which would be 40% larger and alleviate a lot of those issues. The technology that we would get, we have already selected a vendor for the equipment, and they have been in business for decades. And the technology we're talking about is not bleeding edge. It's tried and true tested for many, many years. Optical sorters and eddy currents. So an optical sorter, that's what this machine is you see here. Basically, the material runs underneath this machine and it uses infrared and very high speed and high quality cameras to identify the materials. Instead of a human doing this, these things can pick 600 items a minute. And then they very accurately jet blow it into the correct bunker. An eddy current is a way of sorting aluminum. It basically gives that aluminum a charge that repels it to the right bunker instead of having a human standing. So because this technology will not be eliminating jobs at the new facility, because the human will anticipate retaining the same number of jobs, but instead of having humans sort all day, they'll be doing quality control, which is what people do well, the machines don't. And right now, frankly, there aren't enough workers at the MRF because you can't fill the jobs. More square footage is higher quality output because your conveyors are not stacked deep with material that's spread out. And so it's easier to sort and you get better quality, more accurate sorting. And we have plenty of room for bale storage. And then all the processing is indoors. Right now, the latter half of the processing of the glass that comes through our facility is outside because there's no room for it inside. And so during half the year, well, about a third of the year, when bad weather is here, we have to ship that out of state for further processing because our machinery can't operate and get it to the quality we need it to be. So it would give us 40% more capacity, equip us, this facility would be able to last the next 30 years. So it would give us that ability to adapt. We were having a conversation earlier tonight at this table about, well, what does that mean you can take then? We can't tell you right now because we don't know what 2025 is going to bring us in terms of the markets, the types of packaging, but we know it would give us that flexibility to consider other types of packaging. One example I can give you is like flat beer and soda can carriers that we have now. That's that high value plastic. We do accept it, but it acts like paper in our facility because it's flat. And so it's very hard for it to go into the right place. And some of it ends up in the paper, some of it ends up in the trash. This facility would not have that problem at all because of those optical sorters. So that's just one example, something we know would be better. environmental benefits, when you're going from 47,000 tons a year to being able to divert up to 70,000 tons a year out of your existing last landfill in the state, that's a benefit. Keeping materials in circulation, you're not using virgin materials. We've calculated the anticipated impacts of that on reducing Vermonters' environmental carbon footprint and preserving limited resources. Sorry, I've lost my advanced thing. Oh, here we go. Lastly, but top of the list in importance, we're maintaining those jobs, as I mentioned, and with better working conditions. So has anybody here toured our existing facility? We do offer public tours, and it's a very difficult job. It's difficult conditions. The lighting isn't great. This would be much more open, better ventilation, just 21st century conditions for everybody. So money, that's been a topic this evening. And it's very important that I explain this because this is different from the school bond situation. Here's how we would get the funds to build this. We anticipate the total bill would be $26 million. 16 of that, 16 million coming from the bond bank. That's why we have a bond issue to vote on. 6 million, the closed loop fund, that's a fund that funds municipal infrastructure for closed loop processes, keeping things in circulation. Excuse me, our contribution, 3.5 million, we have cash on hand, but there's some EPA grant funding that has just opened this month, and we'll be applying for that in an effort to reduce that cash contribution. Recycling partnership is another grant. The closed loop fund is a 0% loan, by the way. It's not a grant, it's a loan. So how that bond will be paid for. We are seeking voter approval because we're a municipal district. We have to get approval from our members, so that's Chittenden County voters, to go to bond. So we're seeking approval to borrow up to $22 million. We are going to pay back that loan over the next 25 years through operating revenue. The operating revenue at the MRF is the sale of recyclables and the tip fee that we charge haulers when they bring loads to that facility. So as a municipality, we keep our fees as low as we can because we don't need to make a profit. We don't have shareholders, we just cover expenses, and we set tip fees at a rate that covers the gap between the revenue we get from sale and expenses. Sale of recyclables and our expenses remaining. I'm happy to talk more, answer questions about that if needed. How to get your ballot. Changes to Vermont election law meant special elections could not be included in the general election ballot this year. That's why the ballots you received did not have our bond vote on them. And the Secretary of State or CSWD are also not allowed to mail this directly to voters. That's the law. So you can get the CSWD ballot 3 ways. You can go to the My Voter page. It'll show up there now and say, yes, send me the CSWD ballot, just select it and you'll get it. You can call or visit the town clerk's office. They all have them now and get it from them if you want to vote early, or it will be at all the polling places in Chittenden County. So it's available in all those ways. We just were not by law allowed to, That's my presentation. I wanted to allow plenty of time for questions and answers. Yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll vote for the bond issue. If you'll figure a way that I don't have to drive to Patchen Road from Prospect Parkway to drop off 1 CFL and a couple of flashlight batteries, which have been sitting on my car floor now for 3 months.
I appreciate that. And we are working with Burlington Public Works to look at whether we can expand the current drop-off center on Pine Street.
There is a drop-off center on Pine Street.
No, I mean the facility that's taking food scraps where we had the location on Pine Street.
Okay.
So we don't own that. The city owns it, and no, actually, that might be the only one we do own. I shouldn't say that. At any rate, we're talking to Burlington to see if we can expand into the property next door. So that we can safely take all the things that we have taken in the past, or at least most of the things we have taken in the past. I just want you to know too, that hardware stores accept batteries and fluorescent lights, and I can send you a list of all the stores, or you can get it through our website, that list, so.
I didn't know.
Yes, so they're covered under product stewardship laws, and there are many stores that accept those materials.
Look how useful it is to come to these meetings.
We should have a separate meeting where you just let me answer all your questions.
We've got a question on the line from Matt Grady. Matt, do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up. I really don't feel like we need a larger place in Burlington. We just need it to be open more than like 8 or 10 hours a week and staffed by more than one person. And then one person, if they can't make it, it's closed. So we need like 6 or 7 days a week, hours before and after work, then we're fine. We don't need more space. So can the CSWD work with Burlington to just expand the hours, not expand the space?
So I'm sorry, I didn't get the gentleman's name on the.
Matt.
So Matt.
This is Matt Grady. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So I think that the confusion is right now we're only taking food scraps. And the reason we can only accept food scraps at that location is because we've learned that we cannot safely manage all the things that the state says by law. If you take trash, you have to also accept food scraps, recycling, and other materials. You can't just take trash and recycling, for instance. We can't safely manage all the other materials we were previously managing because of the growth of the use and the volume of those materials in the 20 years that we've been operating that. So Matt, that's why we're looking at expanding, because we want to bring services back to Burlington that we know Burlingtonians want and need locally. And we want to serve this
In
community.
favor of that too, but really all I want to be able to do right now is compost, which I almost very seldom can do because it's almost never open.
Right.
Just like take it in stages, solve that problem also.
Okay, I hear you. I will take that back to our operations team. I can say that the reason the staffing issue is, it's just, we have the same staffing problems. When we have 2 or 3 people call out, we literally don't have bodies to staff facilities. So Matt, thank you for your comments. I will definitely make note of those and the other gentleman and take those back.
Hey, thank you very much.
Nancy, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Michelle, what happens to the current MRF when we have a new one?
Right, so that is on our Q&A sheet, but I'm happy to answer it. What happens to the current MRF when if the bond passes and we build a new one? We have options because we own that. We could sell it. We could use it. We could lease it out to another property or another business, rather. We're not a business, but to a private business if they wanted to use it for something like that. Or we could use it for other services, like bulky waste is something, bulky rigid plastics is something we've looked at adding to our collections, like kiddie pools,
Right.
big wheels, that sort of thing. But we don't have the space to aggregate them and be able to market them. Or we could do pilot programs, partner with local businesses that have hard to recycle products and figure out how to make that work. So we have options. It would be up to our Board of Commissioners to decide.
We had another question over here and then right next to you. Next.
I just want to say it was a great presentation. I was thinking about it before I walked in. And I thought, I was very surprised that I hadn't received the information, my ballot. I was wondering if there's a look at how to change that for, future mail-in balloting. I mean, is there a way to change that? And also, just on the side, I was very curious about the China connection to your product sales.
Sure. So regarding the ballot, the Secretary of State is very aware of this from our experience because we were caught off guard and surprised. The last time we went for a bond issue was 1992. That's not what we do. We're not experts in this. So we've had to really scramble to just get the ballot produced. So I think the law, they realize now that there were unintended consequences that happened because of this. We don't expect it to impact us in the future because we don't intend to go for a bond issue again anytime soon. But it will affect other special election votes. In terms of China, I can tell you that no material from Vermont, recyclables from Vermont are being marketed overseas. So that's not from our facility or the Rutland facility. They are all being marketed in the United States and Canada.
I thought there was a big problem with us being, you say there's quite a bit of demand, which surprised me. And that's why I asked about the China.
Right. So China had a thing called the Chinese sword, and this was before the pandemic, but just after the recession in 2008. And it's complicated, but on the face of it, the way it played out was they said, we're getting too much trash. We don't want the world's trash anymore. Because it used to be, if you ship it to China, they'll buy it and they'll use it because they were the world's largest economy and growing. So they shut down everything. The good news is that it has spurred long needed investment in US domestic recyclables processing. So shuttered mills in the Midwest and Maine in the East are coming back online. Ironically, a lot of them with Chinese investment, because China still needs the raw materials to make their boxes to sell us their stuff. So that's just a glimpse into recycling is both global and hyper local. Does that answer your question?
That was plenty. Thank you.
You're
Very
welcome.
interesting. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'm Mark Howe, and my question is concerning the proposed new facility. So the existing one, you can't expand it. Will the new one, if it's approved, will it be expandable? So that in 30 years, when there's new technology, can that be?
Well, the lifespan of a MRF is generally 30 years. And, you know, a lot of that, who knows how large Chittenden County will be in 30 years, or what recycling will look like in 30 years. It would be built not to serve our current capacity needs, but to have the ability to grow into the facility to serve growth. We have financial modeling available that was shared with our Board of Commissioners. It's on our board, in our board packets. I'm happy to share that link with anybody who wants to see it. That talks about the % annual growth that we've built into the models, and worst case scenario, best case scenario, and all the factors that we put into that. Does that?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, at the beginning of your presentation, you were going over the cost of the bond and everything. Could you just clarify one more time how that does or does not compete in the mind of the voter who's going to be voting for this and for the school?
Thank you. Yeah, we are concerned about that, and you're going to be seeing more and more on this issue in Front Porch Forum, letters to the editor. We've done a couple of op-eds in Digger and on the news, TV news, and places like that, trying to draw that line and make that distinction. We are not funded by property taxes, is the bottom line. So CSWD is a municipality, but our funding is about 50% user fees. So that's when you drop your trash off at the drop-off center, you pay a user fee, or that includes tip fees. When hauling companies bring their loads to our compost facility or the MRF, they pay that user fee, right? That's 50% of our income comes from those. Another 20% is from material and product sales. So that's the recyclables that we sell from the MRF, as well as like scrap metal that we collect at our drop-off centers. Our compost sales, that's another 20% of funding. Another 20 to 25% is the solid waste management fee. That's a fee we collect on every ton of trash that's disposed in Chittenden County. The remainder is like 7% in grant funding. None of that ever is property tax. That's just not the mechanism we use. So the MRF itself pays its expenses through its operations. It does now, and that's how it will. And the other piece is that we have modeled maintaining the tip fee at the MRF right now is $80 a ton.
We've modeled maintaining that on average year over year for 10 years, that same average rate. We will be creating a sinking fund to pay, that we can draw from to pay for the bond obligation for the closed loop fund, which is a zero interest loan, the first $6 million. And then we anticipate having revenue that would cover the remaining bond obligation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Matt, is your hand raised from before, or did you have another question?
That's from before. I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Michelle. That was really informative, and I appreciate you sticking through to the end.
I was happy to listen to it. We've been thinking of, our long-term plan has been retiring to Burlington, and so these were
We'd love to have you.
all very, it's getting closer and closer, so. So this was all of great interest to me, but thank you for
Definitely
having.
want to be in Ward 6.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for having me, and really, if it's, you know, if you want to hear more about any of the work we do, or just let us hear from you more directly, we're always happy to come and have this conversation.
I know you made changes to the flyer. If you can send us the latest version of that, then we can include them with the minutes of the.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
incorporate the PDFs for you, but remember, there are hard copies here for anybody who wants them.
That's great. I think we're done.
All right.
People should eat more pizza.
Or take some home.
Take some pizza.
No.
All right. Thank you.
Nice job there.
Thank you.
Good job.
That was exhausting.